This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
مساء الخير.
Good evening. On this day, the 16th of July, 2008, one of the most complicated and sensitive files between Hezbollah and Israel has come to a close. Living prisoners and hundreds of corpses were exchanged for the corpses of 2 Israeli soldiers and some remains. But what are the initial impressions on this happening? Hezbollah will use the event in politics and diplomacy to say that the war of July 2006 ended with a victory in 2008 by achieving its aim of releasing the prisoners and reclaiming the corpses. The remains of the Palestinians from the 200 that have been returned will be temporarily kept in Lebanon. There is semi-unanimous agreement in Israel that the Jewish state has paid a high price in this swap. This has had much repercussion on Olmert's already shaken government. The hours spent between the Naqoura crossing and the Beirut airport did not overshadow the memorable photograph of the first government of this new era and the first ministerial session. The government has formed a committee which will draft the ministerial declaration. We now take you to Beirut's International Airport, where the 3 helicopters transporting the 5 freed prisoners from Al-Naqoura have arrived to Rafiq Al-Hariri International Airport. Earlier, when the prisoners arrived at Naqoura, they were transported to an area where they rested for an hour. There, they changed their clothes and put on the military uniforms of Hezbollah with the Lebanese flag.
I have to congratulate, from all my heart, those who have returned today to the embrace of their country, the sovereign, the free, the independent. I congratulate the resistance on this new achievement, thanking all those who participated in making the release of the prisoners a reality. I tell Samir Al-Kintar and his freed friends that it is their right to be proud of their country, their people, their army, and their resistance. Their country does not relinquish its right or duty. Your return is a new victory, and the future will be a bright journey in which we will achieve the sovereignty of the land, the freedom of the people, and the culture of peace. Long life to you. Long live Lebanon.
That
was part of the speech of the Republic's president, General Michel Suleiman. The president and the Lebanese officials are now shaking hands with the 5 released prisoners. This is Samir Al-Kintar in the lead. He is shaking hands with Parliament Speaker Nabih Berri, then Prime Minister Fouad Siniora, then the Deputy Secretary General of Hezbollah, Sheikh Naim Qassem, and the Counselor to the Iranian Exterior Minister, Hussein Sheikh Al-Islam.
حسين شيخ الإسلام.
من جديد أهلا بكم. تتواصل عملية تبادل الأسرى بين حزب الله وإسرائيل.
Welcome back. The prisoner exchange between Hezbollah and Israel is underway and is expected to last until tomorrow morning, if not longer. Israel released 5 prisoners who arrived at the Naqoura crossing in southern Lebanon. They include the longest-held Lebanese prisoner Samir Al-Kintar and 4 other Hezbollah members. Hezbollah had earlier received the remains of 12 corpses, 8 of which were from the 2006 war, in addition to the remains of 4 Arabs, including the female Palestinian activist Dalal al-Mughrabi.
وعلى النقيض تماما من أجواء الفرح في لبنان فإن المشهد الإسرائيلي بدا قاتما وممتعضا.
In contrast to the joyful atmosphere in Lebanon, the atmosphere on the Israeli side is grim and greatly subdued. The prisoner exchange between Israel and Hezbollah made Israel appear as the loser, exactly like in the July War of 2006. The number of killed Israeli soldiers during the war has officially been confirmed as 121, with the inclusion of the 2 dead Israeli soldiers who were delivered by the International Red Cross at the Naqoura. Identifying the bodies took many hours. The release of living Lebanese prisoners, headed by Samir Kantar, in exchange for the corpses of 2 soldiers, created a depressed mood in Israel from both the official and civil standpoint.
The position of the Israeli army determined the situation, which was contrary to the position of the Mossad. The Mossad warned that the deal would undermine Israel's deterrence power and cause loss of morale, but the deal was eventually executed.
The prisoner exchange deal at the Naqoura crossing worries Israel on many levels. It represents a new moral victory for Hezbollah, with Israel's acceptance of the conditions it set at the beginning of the war. In addition, Israel fears that this current deal might affect the Shalit deal with Hamas and closes the file on Ron Arad for the time being.
Speaking for the army, I say that we will not invest energy in the return of airman Ron Arad, the soldier Gilad Shalit, and any of the missing Israelis we've been searching for many years now.
Israel is also worried about the possibility that, upon this deal's close, Hezbollah might turn its undivided attention to avenging the assassination of General Imad Bughnaniya. This drawn-out confrontation started in the July War and has now ended 2 years later. It opened and ended with the file of the Lebanese prisoners. Ziad Halabi, Al Arabiya, from the Naqoura border crossing.
My dear brothers and sisters, we today, with this big number of martyrs, we remember all the sacrifices of the resistance, the Lebanese and Palestinian fighters, the Arab fighters, Islamic, national, all fighters from whatever religious sect, from any ideology. We shed memory on them. We are proud and we appreciate all the factions. We appreciate the contributions of all resistance factions, and we appreciate the sacrifices of all resistance fighters and all the martyrs who went to the front lines of battle, of resistance. We take benefit from their experiences, and of course we always take into consideration their sacrifices, and we always speak highly of them. They will never leave our hearts and our memories. And in this context, I'd like to underscore, after what I said, the true identity of the peoples of our region, and this is the main point, the true identity of the peoples of our region, the firm identity of our region, of our ummah, is the identity of resistance and the will of resistance and the culture of resistance and the refusal of occupation and humiliation. Whoever be the occupier and whoever be the tyrant and whoever be those who practice the oppression. And so, for decades, you find that the flag is always raised. The flag of resistance is always raised. It goes from the hands of one group to another, from one faction to another, from one party to another, from one title to another. But all these resistance parties and all these resistance factions, all these titles are just an outside cover, for the main fundamental deep point is that this ummah depends on muqawma. The culture is resistance, and we refuse oppression and tyrants. Some people might be killed. Some of us might be killed in battle. Some might change their minds. But Allah always in this ummah and in this region, Allah always brings about somebody to raise the flag and to continue on the path of resistance.
At 9:38 this morning, the worst fears of the families of the captured soldiers, along with the entire nation, were realized as Hezbollah handed over 2 black coffins containing the bodies of IDF reserve soldiers Eldad Regev and Ehud Goldwasser. The 2 reservists were kidnapped by Hezbollah on the last day of their reserve duty 2 years and 4 days ago, and now have finally been returned home. IBA's Eli Wogelenter reports on the drama played out at the Rosh HaNikra crossing point into Lebanon today.
This is the day all of Israel has been waiting for, the return of kidnapped Israeli soldiers, Staff Sergeant Eldad Regev and Sergeant Major Ehud Goldwasser. But it was not the celebration everyone hoped for, but the sad homecoming of 2 soldiers fallen in action. The bodies were transferred to Israel by the International Red Cross.
I can confirm that the truck is now about to be loaded. And they will leave here for the border a little bit later. At the border, they will be taken over to the Lebanese side by us, where the coffins will be handed over to Hezbollah. On the other side, the International Committee of the Red Cross will receive the 2 Israeli soldiers. They will be taken across the border and handed over to Israeli authorities.
The IDF received a couple of minutes ago 2 coffins through the Red Cross. These coffins are being examined now by our top professional officers in all the medical system and rabbinate systems. When the results of the identification process will be completed, we will proceed with the rest of the process.
According to IDF chief rabbinate sources, confirmation of their identities came hours later because of the condition of the bodies. IDF officers working with the fallen soldiers' bodies described their condition as very bad and report that the corpses were apparently kept refrigerated only close to the time of the exchange. An Israeli Air Force helicopter on the scene at Rosh HaNikra immediately flew out DNA samples from the fallen soldiers to forensic units in central Israel in order to assist in confirming the fallen soldiers' identities. After the confirmation, the prisoner swap between Israel and Hezbollah continued. The exchange deal began at about 8:30 this morning when a convoy carrying the bodies of the 2 Israelis reached the Rosh HaNikra crossing on the Lebanese side of the border, where they were transferred to Red Cross monitors. Sappers inspected the coffins to ensure that they were not booby-trapped. Meanwhile, a truck carrying 19 bodies of Lebanese terrorists passed the Rosh HaNikra border, crossing into Lebanon, the first of many such trucks expected today. The bodies of 199 Lebanese, as well as the 5 Lebanese prisoners, including Samir Kuntar, were to be transferred to Lebanon through the Rosh HaNikra crossing throughout the day. With the identification of the remains of Goldwasser and Regev, the Army officially updated the number of soldiers killed in the Second Lebanon War to 121. Eli Wogelenter, IBA News.
Just a short time from now, the Goldwasser and Regev families are set to participate in a solemn ceremony at the IDF's Shraga base beside Akko in honor of their fallen loved ones. They will be joined by Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, Defense Minister Ehud Barak, and IDF Chief of Staff Gabi Ashkenazi. They were informed of the results of the identification process earlier by General Elazar Stern, head of the Army Manpower Division and Central Division Commander Gadi Shamni. Eldad Regev's father, Tzvi, told Israel Radio earlier today that the family still held out hopes of seeing their sons alive until the last moment. And now, here with me with a very different view is spokesman for the Prime Minister, Mark Regev. Mark, welcome.
Thank you.
Much to everyone's sorrow in its entire country, both soldiers were returned deceased. You just heard Dr. Aaron's scathing criticism. How do you respond?
The fact that they returned in coffins was not a surprise. In the cabinet meeting 2 weeks ago, this was discussed. This was the assessment of the intelligence community, that they both, unfortunately, were no longer in the living. And when we agreed to the framework agreement with the United Nations, we understood that they would be coming back in coffins.
But does this not seem too high a price?
I think not. It's true that this is a difficult decision, and the government grappled with it. These decisions are never easy. Inside the government, some of the ministers agreed with Professor Ahrens. 3 ministers voted against the deal. The majority did not. The majority supported the deal, and the Chief of Staff of the IDF, I think, said it better than anyone else could. He is responsible for all soldiers, and ultimately this is part of the Israeli ethos. Every soldier, every serviceman, servicewoman doing their national service has to know that if they are ever behind enemy lines, this country, this society will do what needs to be done to bring them home. It's not weakness. It's a strength. It shows the great premium that we place on our servicemen and women. And it's, as I say, it's Israeli strength, not weakness.
But it would seem to many critics of this deal that Hezbollah has become a merchant of body parts. What incentive is there now for Hamas to keep Gilad Shalit alive?
First of all, that was discussed in the cabinet, and we're not concerned about that. We believe that they understand that Gilad Shalit must be kept alive for their own benefit. Having said that, I think what we see today says more about Hezbollah than anything else. While Israel is willing to pay a high price to bring back servicemen, to bring them to their families, look what Hezbollah is doing today. They are celebrating in Beirut the return of a brutal murderer. I mean, this man, Samir Kuntar, who brutally with his own hands killed an infant child, they've put him up on a pedestal and turned him into a national hero. I mean, if this isn't weakness, if this isn't perversion, I don't know what is. It exposes Hezbollah for what they really are.
If it would even be possible right now to imagine putting national sorrow aside, could you look at this deal as a victory? Would you describe it as one for Israel?
It's a sad day in Israel. It's a solemn day. Tomorrow, I think the whole country will be uniting with the Regev and Goldwasser families at these funerals. But it's a sign where we're showing, once again, and we've all got children who'll be going to the IDF, we're showing, as a country, as a society, as a people, we're showing the respect and the high premium we put on every one of our young men and women doing their national service. And that's something we can be proud of.
Okay, well, these are live pictures you're seeing here of southern Beirut. Scenes of celebration, and the Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, you see there, taking to the stage, about to make a speech. This is a rare public appearance for him. He's there, of course, to greet the 5 prisoners who have been freed in southern Beirut. Thousands have gathered there to welcome the men home.
I say it again, I returned today from Palestine, but believe me, I returned only because I wanted to go back to Palestine. And, God's willing, I promise my friends, my companions, the most honorable people in Palestine, that we are returning to Palestine with my brothers, the Mujahideens and the Islamic resistance. And I carry to all my brothers in Palestine the greetings of more than 11,000 Palestinian captives and detainees, and a message calling upon the Palestinians to achieve unity. There should be a unity between all the Palestinian factions on the basis of a common political framework, and the unity of our affiliation and of our support to the resistance, because resistance is the only way to achieve victory in Palestine. Dear brothers, I won't be late because I want to give the floor to the Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. However, allow me to send all my greetings and appreciation to His Excellency former Lebanese President Emile Lahoud. And I would like to tell you that all what I wanted to say has been said when I was in the jails. You know my positions, you have read them. And let us all count on God. Peace be upon you all.
Okay, well, these are live pictures you see there of the southern Beirut. Thousands of people gathered to welcome home the 5 Lebanese prisoners, including, of course, Samir Qanta, who we saw just speaking there, paying tribute to Imad Moghniya, the former Hezbollah military commander who was assassinated in Syria, and of course expressing his gratitude to his supporters. Well, I'm now joined by our senior political analyst Marwan Bishara. Marwan, just explain the overall significance of this prisoner deal for Hezbollah, both domestically and in terms of the region at large.
In many ways, this does close the pages on one of the last chapters of the conflict between Israel and Lebanon, Israel and Hezbollah, with the exception of two other dossiers, the landmine maps and the Shab'a farms that remain occupied by Israel. I think more or less 30 years of Israeli invasions and occupations and the separate wars, especially the 2006 wars, have come more or less to an end with this prisoners exchange. It is, Mariam, a day of humanitarian gestures on the surface. However, deep down, at the heart of it today, is a very important strategic day in terms of Hezbollah's capacity to withstand Israeli occupations and invasions. But on the other hand, it does pave the way for Hezbollah to be a more active participant in Lebanese politics. It does open the gate wide, especially with all of those Lebanese politicians from all sides of the spectrum in Lebanon, to be greeting the five Lebanese prisoners as they are freed from the Israeli jails. That does put the focus now on the national coalition government and does, as I said, put an end to one of the bitter chapters of Israel and Lebanon by releasing a 3-decade Lebanese prisoner from the Israeli captivity.
And how is this deal, Marwan, going to impact on future negotiations, prisoner negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians?
Well, certainly we've heard from the Palestinian sides being encouraged that if Israel gave up what it gave up for two of its dead soldiers, certainly for Gilad Shalit, who remains alive in Hamas's captivity in the Gaza Strip, certainly this will lead to further releasing of Palestinian prisoners. As we heard from Qatar, the last of the Lebanese prisoners, there are 11,000 Palestinian prisoners remain in Israeli jails, many of them under administrative detention. And it's hoped, at least by President Abbas, if not by the Hamas faction, that Israel would release a substantial number of prisoners, not only as an exchange for Israel's captured soldiers, Gilad Shalit, but also as a significant step towards perhaps paving the way for more serious negotiations and perhaps reaching an agreement that everyone seems to talk about between Israel and the Palestinians.
The Lebanese resistance has won. It has insisted on its position since the day it captured the two Israeli soldiers. They were captured by Hezbollah with the objective to liberate Lebanese prisoners in a swap deal. Hezbollah insisted on holding only indirect negotiations to liberate its prisoners and has never compromised its demands, despite the devastation that was committed during the 33-day Israeli aggression on Lebanon in the summer of 2006.
By completing this prisoner swap deal, the resistance has forced the enemy to do what they said they would never do, such as releasing the longest-held Arab prisoner in Israeli jails for killing Israelis, not exchanging the corpses of Israeli soldiers with live Arabs, and not resuming the prisoner swap deal until the fate of the Israeli pilot Ron Arad is clarified.
They have harmed you and they'll pay dearly for what they did.
If the Israelis think of any kind of a military operation with the objective of returning the two Israeli prisoners, then they are deluded.
That nothing is safe once they are operating against Israel, and nothing is safe. As simple as that.
All of Israel and the whole world will not be able to return these two Israeli soldiers to their robbed land. If the objective of the military operation is to return the Israeli prisoners, then it will be useless. Let the Israelis do whatever they want.
We will return the two Israeli soldiers, Ehud Udi and Gilad Shalit and Eldad Regev. We will not fail in our war.
There's only one way to return all the prisoners that we have, which is in direct negotiations for a prisoner swap deal, and we will see.
The legend of Samir Kantar entered history 30 years ago. Now he returns to his homeland as a free man. Today is the day of freedom, away from prison. Today, the tears of joy are mixed with dignity and pride.
When Samir left his home early that morning, he said he would not be too late. His goodbyes were quick, but he went away for a very long time. Samir was always confident that he would come back victorious, thanks to the actions and strength of the resistance. Who is this Samir al-Quntar, who has become the most valuable prisoner in the world?
62 في بلدة عبية المطلة على بيروت. He was born in 1962 in the town of Ubaya in the suburbs of Beirut. His childhood was normal. He joined the Palestinian Liberation Front when he was 16 years old. 1 year later, he was imprisoned for 29 years and 3 months. He was sentenced to 3 life terms in addition to 47 years, which adds up to 542 years. On April 22, 1979, Samir Kantar carried out a sacrifice operation along with 3 of his comrades. Stories about the tortures that he was subjected to are like something out of fiction. In fact, such stories are beyond human imagination. He was transferred to many prisons only to end up in the harshest prison in the Negev desert. Despite this, Samir has never lost his enthusiasm. ورغم ذلك كان يتقد حماسة كل من التقوه
Whoever met Samir said that he may have been young in age when he carried out the sacrifice operation, but he always behaved older than he was. He thinks for a long time before taking any step. He organizes himself and the people around him. He is a good listener and carries long and good conversations. He does not regret anything in his life. He was not in his village when the Israelis desecrated it in 1982. Samir, who was incarcerated in Palestine 29 years ago, did not die. He remained active while he was in prison. He registered in an open Israeli university in Tel Aviv and studied humanitarian and social issues through distance learning and obtained a master's degree. Today is different from all other days. His home, which he does know, is waiting for him. His family had bought the home many years ago. His sisters furnished it and put their personal touches into it. The home has everything that was sent by Samir when he was in prison: books, dear letters, and objects with sentimental value. He also smuggled his smashed wristwatch that he was wearing when he was arrested because he did not want it to be confiscated. His aspiration is to continue on the path of resistance. The 46-year-old man asked Hezbollah to prepare a military uniform for him so it would be the first clothes he wears in Lebanon. He also asked that his first destination in Lebanon be the grave of the martyr Imad Abu Ghneya. Today is the day of Samir Kantar, the symbol of steadfastness and resilience.
Get more news about the Middle East online at linktv.org/mosaic. The Mosaic webpage offers a complete archive of Mosaic programs, program transcripts, the Mosaic video podcast, and the Mosaic Intelligence Report, a weekly analysis of the hottest stories from the Middle East. The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible with the support of viewers like you. Thank you. This program was brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news. with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.